Welcome to the ninth episode of the Executive Leadership Council Business Brief. I'm Mike Hyder, President and CEO of the Executive Leadership Council. And today we're discussing a very important topic with a very, very important person, a lifetime voting rights advocate, the former leader of the Congressional Black Caucus, and the current senior chief deputy whip of the House of Representatives, Congressman G.K. Butterfield. For most of his life, Congressman Butterfield has served the people of North Carolina. A double Eagle graduate of North Carolina Central University in Durham, Congressman Butterfield served as a Superior Court judge and a Supreme Court judge before being elected to Congress. He currently serves on the House Committee on House Administration, the Joint Committee on the Library, and the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, and has been an outspoken proponent for federal voting rights legislation throughout his entire career. Welcome, Congressman. It's a pleasure to see you.
Thank you, Michael. Let me say greetings to you and to all of my friends at the Executive Leadership Council. Just thank you so much for your friendship down through the years, and thank you for the great work that you guys are doing and will continue to do in the future.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate it. Your partnership means the world to us also. Before we begin, Congressman, earlier this week, the news broke that Justice Breyer would be stepping down from the Supreme Court. I just want to take advantage of this while we're together. And yesterday, we heard the president say he plans to nominate a Black woman to replace Breyer. Can you talk a bit about what it would mean to Blacks in the legal profession and, frankly, Black professionals everywhere if and when she is confirmed?
Well, thank you for beginning with that question, because that's the most relevant question right now. It's at the top of the news, and it's something that we're going to have to deal with over the next few weeks. There's hardly anything more important than who sits on the United States Supreme Court. I've been in the legal profession all of my life, 13 or 14 years as a lawyer, 15 years as a judge, and now 18 years in Congress. And I can tell you, we've got to pay attention to the judiciary. We've put all of our energy into state legislatures and Congress and even to the issue of electing a president, but we cannot overlook the judiciary. 9 members, 9 justices serve on the United States Supreme Court, and 5 of those 9 justices can hand down decisions, opinions, interpreting the Constitution that will impact us for more than a generation, just for generations yet to come. And so we've got to know what's going on. What we have here is an anticipated vacancy from Justice Breyer. Breyer has been on the court now for more than 25 years. He is a liberal justice, and he's announced that he's going to retire. We are accustomed to a Supreme Court that is 5-4 or 4-5, and we've lived with that down through the years. But in recent years, because Donald Trump had an opportunity to appoint 3 justices to the court is now a 6-3 court. And so that's why Joe Biden has got to get this thing right. He's got to get the right person on the court so that we can have balance. During the campaign, candidate Biden then promised the American people that if he was elected president, that he would appoint not just a minority to the Supreme Court, but an African-American woman to the Supreme Court. And now that we have this vacancy, and President Biden on yesterday announced that he's going to fulfill that campaign promise, we're looking forward to that appointment. But whoever serves on the court will be participating in some of the most profound decisions of our lifetime. And so we've got to get it right. I remember when Thurgood Marshall first went on the court, that was seismic. It was just earth-shattering. And Marshall served on the court after being Solicitor General for many years and made a difference. That one man, along with a few others on the court, but really made a difference. I remember the 54 Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Board of Education, how powerful that was. And I could just go on and on. I could talk about the bad decisions of the court, but we've got to get a good justice on the court.
Well, this is such a historic moment, and we're all going to be watching. So I appreciate your perspective on it. It's real time opportunities for us. But let's take a step back to a time before you were Congressman Butterfield. Okay, let's go back there for a minute, because I read that you come from a family of voting rights advocates. And can you tell me about your parents' work in North Carolina and how it influenced your decision to go into public service?
Thank you for that question, Michael. Let me just take you back several decades. My daddy immigrated from Bermuda in 1917. He came over looking for a job, couldn't find a job, and so he volunteered for the war. Went into World War I. Yes, World War I in 1917. At the age of 17, he was a non-citizen and volunteered for the war, and he was accepted. He fought in France. He was discharged from the army, and he came to North Carolina and went to Shaw University, historically black and historical black college, and tried to enroll in college. They told him he didn't have a high school diploma, and he said, "Yes, but I fought in the war." And so they took his military service as a high school diploma, enrolled him in the college program. He finished college there at Shaw University and went on to Meharry Dental College out in Nashville, Tennessee, and graduated from Meharry. Came back to North Carolina, married my mama, and that's where he stayed for the rest of his life. When he came to Wilson, North Carolina, which is my home, in 1928, he was welcomed to the community by the white establishment. They invited him in and thanked him for coming and said that the Negro community needed a dentist and he was in the right place at the right time. They told Dad that they were going to do him a favor, would allow him to become a registered voter. Can you imagine? And he said, "A registered voter? Yes, sir. We're going to allow you to become a registered voter. What about the literacy test? The literacy test won't apply to you. You can just become a registered voter." And it happened. Well, as my father set up his dental practice, he tried to influence his patients to become registered voters. And that's when he was told that this was an accommodation for him. It was a favor and not intended to be widespread. And they
Wow.
demanded that he stop any voter registration efforts, and he did. And then the 30s came along. That was the period of the Depression and then World War II. But then starting in the 1940s, he started feeling himself. He was a Black professional man in a low income Black community in Eastern North Carolina, with a world perspective, having come from Bermuda, having fought in the war. Very intelligent man he was. And so he started putting together voter registration drives, and it worked. He formed the local NAACP and other community groups, and they got African Americans to get comfortable with the literacy test, and it demanded that they go down, or encouraged that they go down and become registered voters. And many of them did. Some didn't, but many of them did. And so finally in 1953, they looked at the voter registration rolls and found that African Americans there was a gap between Black and white voter registration in Ward 3, which was a city council ward, and that if they could just register a few more voters, they could take over a city council seat. And so they concentrated on voter registration, and it worked. They got Black voter registration up to an acceptable level. He ran for office in 1953 on May the 5th. And when the elections returns, when the ballots were counted, it was a tie vote. And in order to break the tie, the law required that a white girl, be blindfolded, reach into a container and pull out a name. And
Really?
my dad's name was selected from the container. He becomes a city council member. That was a great moment. It made a profound impression on me. I'm a tender 6-year-old kid. 2 years later, he was reelected in 1955, and then he started really feeling himself. He started talking about some real radical stuff. He wasn't talking about Black Lives Matter or critical race theory. He wanted to pave the streets. He wanted to build a recreation center in the African American community, and there was great resentment among white voters because of that. And so in 1957, when it was time for his second reelection, they changed the method of election from district elections to at large, which meant that he not only had to face the voters in his community, but had to face the voters at large. And so when he ran in 1957, after the change in election procedure, he lost. He lost the election. He came in last place. So you've got from 53 to 57, a Black man on the city council in this rural southern city, and starting at 57, no representation at all. I'm 10 years old by this time. My father's upset. He's angry. He's polite, but he's still angry. And the community was upset. 1959, another African-American ran, he lost. In 1961, another African-American ran and he lost. But the Black minister who ran in 1961 decided to challenge the change in election procedure and took the case to the North Carolina Supreme Court. He lost it. It even went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the case was not won. But by this time, I am 14 years old. I'm watching all of this stuff go down, and I made up my mind then that I'm going into politics and I'm going to become a lawyer because we're going to change some things in my hometown. And so that was the impetus for me going to college and majoring in political science and eventually going to law school and then getting into politics.
And you know, I knew I've heard you share this with me in the past, and I just so wanted everybody to hear that's the origin of this. And there's nobody better, in my opinion, as a result of even what you've just described about your story, who can speak to this very topic in the situation we're in right now relative to voting laws. And so thank you for that, because we've seen so many changes to state voting laws across the South recently, even in your state. And Congressman, can you talk about the importance of this moment and how these changes are impacting voters in elections?
Sure. You know, I'm glad I'm talking to a group of men and women who are executives. You're very informed, you're very intelligent people. And as Congressman Bobby Scott and I talk about often, when you talk to groups, you've got to make up your mind, am I talking up or am I talking down? Because you have to customize your language and your speech to the level of the listeners. And I'm talking to a group right now that I'm talking directly to some very well-informed people. And so let me get in the weeds just a little bit with you. Racially polarized voting. That means that there is a group of voters who refuse to vote for a candidate simply because of their race. It is pervasive, particularly in the rural South. If we did not have polarized voting in this country based on race, we would not need a Voting Rights Act. We would not need all of the extreme things that we've been able to accomplish. But because voting is polarized along racial lines, we have to be very careful about the laws that we enact. In 1965, the Congress of the United States passed and President Johnson signed into law the 1965 Voting Rights Act. We've all heard about the VRA. We know about Edmund Pettus Bridge and John Lewis and all of that. But here is the Voting Rights Act. There are many provisions of this law, but I will only discuss two or three. Number one, there is the elimination of the literacy tests. Not many people talk about that. That was the first thing in the Voting Rights Act. It eliminated literacy as a pre-qualification for voting. That was a big deal because a large percentage of African Americans in 1965 were illiterate, or if they were literate, they still had to convince the registrar that they were competent in order to register to vote. And so because of that, registrars were very subjective. Even with school teachers and other well-educated African Americans, they were denied the right to register because they failed the literacy test. Voting Rights Act eliminated the literacy test. That was good. The second part of the Voting Rights Act was Section 2. Section 2 gives, and it started off by saying African-American communities, and now it's minority communities, but African-American communities the right to bring a lawsuit if they feel that they can allege and prove that a voting law or a voting system or practice or procedure has the effect of discriminating against them and diluting their voting strength. That's called Section 2. It gives the right to sue. And lawsuits, as we all know, and certainly you know in your corporate lives, that lawsuits are very expensive and very time consuming. But Section 2 was put on the book. Section 5 was the other section. We call it pre-clearance. It identified southern states that had a long history of discrimination in voting and singled those states out. North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, the southern states who had a long history of discrimination, single out those states for what we call pre-clearance. In other words, states, before you change any law that affects voting, you must come to the Department of Justice to get it pre-cleared. Southern states did not like that, but it went on the books in 1965. Southern states ignored it for several years, but in the 1980s, and I'm a lawyer by this time working with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and to try to bring down some of these election systems. Finally, local jurisdictions started submitting their changes to the Department of Justice. Oftentimes, the change was approved. Many times, the change was not approved. That included redistricting, when states would draw maps for legislative boundaries and congressional boundaries. They had to be pre-cleared. And so we've used the Voting Rights Act very effectively down through the years. Literacy tests, Section 2 litigation, Section 5 pre-clearance. Well, because of that, we have litigated all across the country, and now we've been able to elect African-American members to state legislatures and state assemblies, elect African-American members to Congress. You know, the class of 1992 that came into Congress, which was the Jim Clyburn, Sanford Bishop, Benny Thompson, Bobby Scott, that class of Congress members, they came to Washington. They came to Washington because of a successful litigation, successful lawsuit under Section 2, but it has broken down barriers. But now I'm sad to report to you that in 2013, in a case called Shelby County versus Holder, the U.S. Supreme Court really threw us a heavy punch. They threw out Section 5. Technically, they didn't throw out Section 5. They suspended the use of Section 5 by saying that it cannot be enforced. The court said it's still the law of the land, but it cannot be enforced until Congress updates the formula that decides which states are in, which states are not in with respect to pre-clearance. And so we have not had the benefit of pre-clearance since 2013. And these states have just gone crazy. They've started electing terrible laws, discriminatory laws all across the country, and it's having a devastating impact on our ability to be counted and to count it fairly. And so we're trying to change the Section 5 formula. I'm the chairman of the election subcommittee in the House. We've collected all of the data and all of the evidence that's needed, thousands of pages of documents, and we passed the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We passed it in the House on a party line vote, sent it over to the Senate, and the world knows what happened in the Senate. It did not pass because of 50 Republicans and 2 Democrats. But I just want our friends in ELC to understand the power of the Voting Rights Act and how that affects the franchise and how it affects our ability to be counted and included in the American democracy.
Wow, thank you. You know, and to your point, you know, there's so many of us were just so disappointed to see the voting rights legislation stall in the Senate when it did. And Congressman Butterfield, what will this federal legislation do to protect voters? I just want people to understand it from your perspective, and
sure,
how will it facilitate a healthy democracy in your opinion?
Well, I'm again going to get very technical with you.
That's fine.
Okay. We actually had 2 pieces of legislation that we sent over to the Senate. We call it the For the People Act, which is H.R. 1, and the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act was H.R. 4. We passed these 2 pieces of legislation in the House. H.R. 4 was the update for the formula for Section 5, and I just spoke about that. But H.R. 1, the For the People Act, was a very comprehensive piece of legislation that we have worked on for years. It first of all declared a national holiday for Election Day. It also told local jurisdictions that you have to have a mandatory number of early voting days, early voting hours. You cannot change polling places unnecessarily. It set a floor, a minimum floor for how states can conduct elections. In addition to that, it set criteria for redistricting. Right now, states think that they just have an unlimited right to draw maps any way they want to draw maps every 10 years. And we are seeing that play out all across the country. Most Republican states are drawing terrible maps that disenfranchise Democratic voters, and we can get into that later if you want to. But this legislation was intended to set a floor for redistricting. We passed both of those in the House, sent them over to the Senate, and we were very hopeful that we could get them passed, but it did not pass. And so, as Jim Clyburn and others have said, and I say, in order to compensate for that, we can't surrender. We've got to get ready to have a 100% turnout in the 2022 election, and we've got to get all of our folk registered to vote: black, white, and brown, male, female, gay, straight, anyone who believes in democracy, anyone who understands the rule of law and fairness in elections. We must get them registered to vote. We have a 50-50 Senate. You know that 50-50 Senate with one change in the composition of the Senate. There could be dramatic consequences. We have 4 votes up in the House of Representatives. If we lose 5 seats in the House, then the other party will be responsible for the agenda and the work in the House. And so this election in 2022 is very important. I know ELC is a nonpartisan organization. You guys told me that from day one years ago. I appreciate it. I respect it. And so I'm not going partisan with you today, but I am going political. Ladies and gentlemen, you got to be involved in this election. Pay attention to what's happening in your state capital. Pay attention to what we're doing in Washington, because it really, really, really matters.
Yeah. And, that was a clear lead up to, and you probably just addressed it, because I was going to ask, what can we as executive leaders do to support the preservation of American democracy, just coming from your experience and your lips to our ears? Anything to add in response to that? Because I just think it would be important for everybody to hear.
Sure. Well, a few months ago, I announced my retirement from Congress. This is my
I
last
heard that.
term.
I was in disbelief, but that's true, huh?
Well, the time has come.
Okay.
I announced my retirement. I will have had 18 years in that body, and 18 years is enough. I served as a judge for 15 years, 14 years as a lawyer. 2 years in the Army. You put all those years together, it's a long time. And so I've made the very painful decision that it's time for me to retire. One reason I'm retiring, I confess, is because of the new district lines. My state legislature has taken my congressional district from a very comfortable Democratic district to a toss-up district. And I've been in this district long enough to know I can actually look at a map and tell whether I can win or lose, or whether it would be a draw. And when I looked at that map, I knew immediately, without looking at the data, that this is going to be a pretty tough race. The Republicans are going to target this district. They're going to pump millions of dollars in here. They will put me up on television as a villain, as someone who's anti-democratic, anti-American, someone who believes in killing babies and critical race theory and all of the other garbage that they put up against liberal or progressive candidates. And I did not have the stomach for that. I just felt that it was time to pass the baton to someone else that's going to take millions of dollars to hold on to this seat. And what better time than to pass the baton than when the lines are being redrawn? The second reason I'm retiring is because I will be 75 years old this year. Even though my attending physician in the Capitol says that I'm in excellent health, the fact remains I am 75 years old in a few weeks. And it's time for me to do some fun things and to get out of the pressure cooker and do some things that I enjoy doing. And so it's been a joy for me to have served. But let me tell you, I came to Washington in 2004. It was a very partisan environment when I arrived, but it was not crazy. It was not personal. But our political system is broken. It's terribly broken. And partisanship is not necessarily to blame. It's what I call personalization. In this environment that I work in every day, it's not enough to disagree with a political opponent, about his or her policy. I mean, that's been going on since the beginning of the nation. There's always been partisan disagreement and viewpoint disagreement. But when you have a disagreement with your opponent, you don't have to discredit her. You don't have to demonize her. You don't have to destroy that person's character and his or her career. But that's what we're seeing in Washington. We saw it play out over the last 4 years. We saw it on January 6th. And let me tell you, January 6th was the textbook definition of an insurrection. And I'm so proud of the January 6th committee led by Congressman Benny Thompson, whose birthday is this weekend. I'm so happy that they are getting to the truth. They're going to get the facts and present them to the American people. So I will conclude by saying that we now have a lack of civility, a disregard for the truth, blatant lies every day. And so what you as executives must do, I'm not going to say what you can do, what you must do, ladies and gentlemen. You've got to be our allies on the ground. I'm not talking about making donations to our campaigns, and certainly that's important, and many of you do that. I know you do it, but something more important than that, you've got to be our ally. You've got to insist that elected officials at the local, state, and national levels, that we become a little bit more civilized and need to respect each other, respect the difference of opinion. And we need to resurrect the word compromise. You all compromise. You go to your C-suites with one idea in mind, and when you leave, it's something different, but it's okay. It still accomplishes what you want to accomplish. That is the bottom line. I get it, and you get it. And you must make sure that politicians, elected officials get it. We must be willing to compromise if we're going to save this democracy. Right now, we're at a crossroads. We're at a very serious crossroads, and we need each one of you to help us in this endeavor.
Oh, my goodness. Congressman G.K. Butterfield, this was an awesome interview. Thank you so much for your time. I know how busy you are, and I just so appreciate you taking the time to share your truth on our behalf with us.
Thank you.
And we wish you continued success, sir, and good health as you tackle the issues and in your retirement.
I can't retire. I'm just going to move to another battleground.
Okay, great. And if you need us, the ELC is here to support you however we can as well, okay?
You'll be seeing a lot of me in the years to come, I promise you.
That'd
That's
be
all
great.
I can say right now.
Awesome.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so
to
much.
our viewers,
thank you.
As always, thank you for joining us. And we'll check back next month for our next ELC business brief in February. And everybody have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Thanks. Thanks, Congressman.